The first thing on the recording was breathing, not static. Not wind pushing through a broken microphone. Breathing wet, strained, patient. The kind of breathing made by someone who had been standing still in the dark for a very long time, waiting for the machine in their hand to notice them. Then a man's voice, thin with interference, speaking in Russian. "Cameras on. If anyone finds this, do not come into the lower corridor." The tape cut for 3 seconds. When it returned, something else was breathing with him. Mila Sidorova heard that for the first time at 2:13 a.m. in a basement archive 2,000 kilometers from the exclusion zone, and by the end of the night she had made the worst decision of her life. The basement belonged to a media preservation lab in Kyiv, one of those windowless government-funded places where old magnetic reels came to die cleanly. The air always smelled faintly of vinegar, dust, and warm plastic. Rows of steel shelving held canisters and cassettes tagged with numbers from dead ministries, dissolved television stations, abandoned scientific institutes. Most nights the work was mindless. Clean the heads, repair the tape, digitize the contents, upload, log the metadata, move on. Most nights they were children's choirs, agricultural reports, assembly speeches, local news. This tape had arrived in an unmarked lead-lined storage box with no paperwork, no source chain, and a single label in fading black grease pencil. CHNPP Unit 4/18 NOV 1997/lower service level/final Chernobyl nuclear power plant. Final. Mila had stared at that word for a long time before opening the case. Her supervisor Anton had told her not to touch it until the morning. He'd gone home an hour earlier, yawning into his scarf, reminding her that half the boxes from the Ministry of Emergency Situations were mislabeled junk, and the other half were Wur's bureaucratic nightmares with missing permissions. "Log it, leave it, go home," he'd said. But Mila had stayed. She was 34, meticulous, and famous among exactly 6 co-workers for never leaving a mystery sealed if it could be opened with gloves and enough patience. Her father had been an engineer who worked cleanup logistics in the zone after the collapse of the Soviet Union. He died of a cancer everyone called unrelated in the way governments call floods weather. He used to come home smelling like metal and rainwater, sit at the kitchen table long after midnight, and stare at his hands as if he'd forgotten how they belonged to him. When she was 11, he told her there were places near Reactor 4 where silence did not feel empty. It felt occupied. He never explained. 3 weeks later, he started coughing blood into the sink. So when Mila saw the word Chernobyl, she did what she had always done with the things that frightened her most. She moved closer. The cassette itself was old analog video, the shell warped slightly from heat. There were rust stains along one spool as though it had once sat somewhere damp. She cleaned it gently, fed it through a calibrated deck, adjusted the tracking, and watched the signal bloom onto the monitor in gray-white snow. The first 30 seconds were almost unreadable bands of distortion rolling over a dark corridor lit by a weak lamp. Concrete walls. Pipes sweating condensation. A red time stamp in one corner. The 18th of November 97, 11:41 p.m. A man walked with the camera, and every step sent the image shuddering. He spoke under his breath, breathless not from exertion but from trying not to panic. "This is Senior Technician Leonid Belyaev. Lower service level beneath the Western Turbine Annex. Team of 3. We lost radio contact at 11:07 p.m. I am making a visual record in case..." The audio cracked. He swallowed. "In case command says we imagined it." The beam of his flashlight slid along the corridor wall. On the concrete, half-buried beneath peeling paint, someone had drawn dozens of circles in chalk. Not neat circle spirals, really, layered over each other until they formed a nest of white loops. Some were childlike and uneven. Others looked precise enough to have been drafted with instruments. They covered the wall from knee-height to ceiling. Leonid muttered, "These were not here yesterday." Behind Mila, the preservation lab hummed with refrigeration units and server fans. One fluorescent tube overhead buzzed intermittently. Beyond the heavy fire door was a long stairwell leading up to the sleeping city. Everything around her was ordinary enough that the footage should have remained safely on the other side of the screen. It didn't. She leaned closer. On the tape, Leonid turned a corner into a pump room drowned in shadow. The camera light caught another technician standing perfectly still in the middle of the floor. "Grisha?" No response. The figure faced away from the lens. protective suit, helmet, gloves, one arm hanging loose. The other bent at the elbow with the hand pressed to the side of the helmet as if listening to a radio transmission. Leonid took 2 steps forward.
Grisha, answer me.
The man slowly lowered his hand. Then Mila saw the wall behind him. It was moving. Not visibly at first. More a contradiction than emotion, as though the concrete could not decide where its surface ended. The camera auto-adjusted, grains swelling and shrinking, and for an instant the wall behind Grisha appeared covered in handprints. Hundreds of them. Gray on gray. Some small enough to belong to a child. Leonid whispered, "Oh God." Grisha turned. The tape glitched violently at the exact moment his face should have come into view. Horizontal bars ripped through the picture. Audio whined. The image doubled and smeared. When it stabilized, Grisha was gone. Only the helmet remained on the floor, visor cracked from the inside. Mila's fingers tightened around her headphones. A pressure had settled behind her eyes. She told herself it was fatigue. She had spent 10 hours already repairing mold-eaten reels from the 90s. The human brain found patterns in damage. It made ghosts from tape errors and faces from noise. That was all. Then Leonid began to cry, not loudly. Just one controlled, humiliated breath after another, the kind a man makes when terror has pushed him beyond dignity. He kept filming. The camera swung back toward the corridor. There, at the far end where the light didn't quite reach, stood another figure. Taller. Too tall. Its head nearly touched a pipe crossing the ceiling. It was not wearing protective gear. It looked for one impossible second like a person wrapped from throat to ankles in strips of blackened material hanging wetly from the body. The flashlight beam struck it and seemed to dim. Leonid backed away. The figure did not move, but the breathing on the audio deepened, as if the microphone had been lifted to a mouth that was learning how to use lungs. Then the voice on the tape spoke again, very softly, and Mila felt every hair rise on her arms. It knows when it is being watched. She jerked the headphones off. The lab returned in a rush, the drone of machines, the fluorescent buzz, her own pulse hammering in the silence between mechanical sounds. She stared at the paused frame. The tall figure in the corridor looked like a defect in the image more than an object. She told herself exactly that once, twice, 10 times. Then the monitor blinked. The tape had not been playing. Yet the image changed, one frame forward. The tall figure was closer. Mila's chair scraped across the floor as she shoved back from the console. For a moment she thought she'd nudged the controls without noticing. She leaned in, checked the deck. Stop mode. No shuttle movement. The time counter frozen. The monitor blinked again. Another frame forward. Now the figure occupied more of the corridor. Its shape was still vague, but the proportions were wrong in ways her mind refused to hold. The arms seemed too long, the shoulders too narrow, the head tilted at an angle that felt less anatomical than inquisitive. And where a face should have been, there was only a pale blur. Mila reached over and killed the monitor. The screen went black. In the reflection she saw herself, the room behind her, rows of shelves, the weak ceiling lights, and in the darkness over her right shoulder, something standing at the far end of the lab. She spun so hard the chair toppled. Nothing. Only shelving, stacked canisters, the fire door, the time clock mounted on the wall. Her breathing came shallow and cold. She hated herself in that instant, hated the little surge of animal fear, hated the memory of being 9 years old and waiting outside a hospital room while her mother wept into both hands. She stood very still and listened. The lab listened back. After a full minute, she righted the chair and forced herself to move methodically. She turned the monitor back on. Static blue system screen. No playback. No figure. She checked the room. Empty. She laughed once, soundless and ugly, to prove to herself that she was still rational. Then she put the headphones back on. The rest of the tape should have been enough to make any sane person destroy it. Leonid descended a metal stair into what appeared to be a lower maintenance level that, according to several maps Mila vaguely remembered, should not have extended beneath that section of the annex at all. The architecture became stranger the farther he went. The corridors were older than the station above them, or seemed older, rough concrete, rusted doors without labels. Utility markings that predated the later Soviet stenciling. Several doorways had been welded shut from the outside. One had a faded symbol painted on it in red, a circle with 3 vertical lines crossing through it like claw marks. Leonid kept whispering names. Grisha, Yura.
Sometimes another name, Katya.
The deeper he went, the less equipment noise there was. No pumps.
No fans.
No hiss of steam in pipes. Just his steps, his breath, and underneath both, a low sound like distant people speaking through several walls. At 0:12 a.m. on the timestamp, he found Yura, or part of him. Mila nearly ripped the headset off again. There was no gore at first glance, only a shape collapsed beside a drainage channel. But when Leonid crouched and the flashlight beam steadied, the truth emerged in fragments the mind had to reassemble against its will. The protective suit was split open from throat to pelvis. The body inside looked less torn than emptied. The face, what little the camera caught of it, wore an expression not of pain but of astonishment so profound it bordered on recognition. On the wall above the body, traced in a dark residue, was a sentence in Russian. He opened the wrong door, Leonid retched. The camera clattered. When he lifted it again, his hands shaking uncontrollably, the writing on the wall had changed. Now it read, "Ultoo." Mila paused the tape and sat rigid, her mouth dry. There were ways to fake writing changes on analog footage. There were ways to stage bodies, manipulate splices, create illusions. But none of those possibilities explained the timestamp continuity, the field noise, the unbroken camera movement. None of them explained why the audio spectrum on her restoration software showed no evidence of inserted layers where the breathing changed, or why Leonid's voice carried the cracked fatigue of someone beyond performance. She needed sleep. Distance. Another technician in the room.
She knew that.
Instead, she kept watching. At 0:19 a.m., Leonid reached a blast door standing open by less than half a meter. Beyond it, darkness so complete the camera rendered it as a solid slab of black. On the floor before the threshold lay Katya's flashlight, still on. Beam pointed into the gap. The light vanished into the darkness like it had entered deep water. Leonid stopped. For a long time he did not move. The whispering beyond the door grew louder. Not many voices. One voice perhaps speaking in overlapping layers. Male and female. Young and old. Some words Russian, some Ukrainian, some impossible to place. The effect was of a throat trying on human identities as easily as changing masks. Then, clear as a knife laid on glass, a woman's voice spoke from inside the dark. "Leonid, don't let it record you." He made a sound Mila would remember for the rest of her life. Hope and terror at once. "Katya." The voice answered immediately. A pause. Then, in Leonid's own voice, "Katya?" The flashlight on the floor rolled an inch toward him. Nothing touched it. Leonid backed away so fast the camera smashed against the wall. The image flared. In that bright blur, for less than a second, the darkness beyond the door was not empty. It was crowded. Shapes stood shoulder to shoulder just beyond the threshold, packed together in absolute silence, all facing outward. The frame cleared. The doorway was black again. Then came the last uninterrupted stretch of footage. Leonid ran. Corridors reeled by. Pipes, doors, chalk circles, flaking paint. The microphone overloaded with his breathing. Several times he looked behind him, and each time there was nothing there. That somehow made it worse. When he reached the stairwell to the upper level, he stopped dead.
Someone was standing at the top.
Backlit by weak emergency lighting, just a silhouette. Human-sized this time. One hand resting lightly on the railing. Leonid whispered, "How did you get there?" The figure answered in a woman's voice, "Not Katya." Mila knew the voice before she understood how. It was her mother's. "Mila," it said gently, "turn this off." Her body went cold in a single total wave. She tore the headphones away so violently the cord snapped against the desk. For a second she could not breathe. The lab around her seemed to tilt. She was not hearing correctly. Fatigue was doing things to her auditory memory. The mind was suggestible. It reached for familiar tones under stress. She knew all of that. She knew it with the bright, useless clarity of panic. On the silent monitor, Leonid stared upward at the unseen face above the stairs. The tape wobbled with his shaking hand. Then the silhouette at the top step began to descend. One step, another. With each movement, its proportions changed. elongating, narrowing, then compressing again as though distance could not settle on a single answer. Its right hand dragged along the railing with patient affection. Leonide backed up and the camera tilted down. The final image before the tape cut was not the figure on the stairs. It was the wall beside Leonid, where damp concrete had darkened in the shape of a handprint. A fresh handprint, pressed from the other side. The tape ended there. No credits. No data slate. Just black screen and a hiss that continued far too long, like a line left open. Mila sat without moving. The digital timer on the desk now read 3:06 a.m. Somewhere upstairs, old pipes knocked in the heating system. She stared at her own reflection in the dead monitor and tried not to think about her mother, dead 14 years, saying her name in that soft, tired way she used to when Mila fell asleep on the sofa and had to be woken for bed. There was a rational explanation. There had to be. Perhaps this was some classified training film, some grotesque psychological experiment from the chaotic 90s. Perhaps the voice resemblance was coincidence sharpened by exhaustion. Perhaps someone in the building was playing a deeply stupid joke with archived audio. Then she noticed the file on her workstation had changed its name. She had digitized it under a standard accession string, unsorted 4471A. Now the file in the preview window was labeled, "Mila, don't bring this home." Her scalp tightened. Slowly, not trusting her hands, she checked the keyboard history. No rename command, no remote access prompt, no network activity spike. The folder timestamp updated less than 10 seconds ago. Something tapped once against the fire door at the end of the lab. Mila looked up. Another tap, soft, deliberate. Then, from the other side of the thick metal door leading to the stairwell, a voice said in a hoarse whisper, "Please let me in." I found the lower corridor. Mila didn't move, because she knew that voice too. It was Anton, but Anton had left hours ago. The handle began to turn very, very slowly. The handle stopped halfway. Mila stared at it, her entire body locked in place, as if the slightest movement might invite whatever was on the other side to finish what it had started. The metal groaned softly. Then Anton's voice came again, weaker now, strained like someone speaking through a throat full of dust. "Mila, open the door. It's cold out here." Her mind raced, clawing for logic. Anton had left. She had watched him go. She could picture the way he'd adjusted his coat, the tired wave over his shoulder. There were cameras in the building, security logs. Reality had structure. It didn't bend like this, unless her eyes flicked involuntarily to the monitor. The black screen reflected her again, and behind her something shifted. She spun. Nothing. Just shelves, boxes, the dead hum of machines. The tapping came again, louder this time. 3 knocks, then silence. Mila forced herself to move, slow, controlled. She stepped toward the door, each footfall feeling louder than it should have, like the room itself was listening to her approach. "Anton?" she called, her voice thin. A pause. Then, from the other side, perfectly timed, perfectly shaped, yes. No hesitation, no confusion. Too perfect. Her stomach dropped.
"Say something else," she said.
"What did you tell me before you left?" There was a delay this time, a long one. Mila could hear faint movement through the door. Not footsteps. Something softer. A shifting like fabric dragging across concrete. Then Anton's voice returned. "You told me to go home." Wrong. He had told her to go home. Mila stepped back. The handle twitched again. And then, very quietly, the voice said, "Open the door, Mila." But this time it wasn't Anton. It was her.
Same tone, same breath.
Same slight rasp on the second syllable of her name. Her pulse slammed in her ears. The thing outside exhaled slowly against the metal. And then, softer than before, "You already did." The handle turned. Mila lunged forward and slammed the manual lock into place. The mechanism clunked heavy and final. For a second, just one, there was nothing. No voice. No movement. Then a slow, dragging sound began on the other side of the door, as if something had lowered itself to the floor and was pressing its weight against it. The metal bowed inward with a dull, resonant thud. Mila stumbled back, heart hammering so violently it hurt. "Stop," she whispered. though she didn't know who she was talking to. The pressure increased. The hinges creaked, not violently, not like something trying to break in, like something patient, testing. Then the pressure stopped, just like that. The silence that followed was worse. Mila stood frozen for what felt like minutes. Nothing, no breathing, no movement, no voice. Only the quiet hum of the lab returning, like the world trying to pretend nothing had happened. Her gaze drifted unwillingly back to the monitor. The file name still glowed there. Mila, don't bring this home. Her hands trembled as she reached for the mouse.
No, no more.
She needed to report this. Call security. Get someone else in the room. Multiple people.
Come at us.
Witnesses. Reality anchored by other minds. But instead, she clicked. The file reopened. The screen flickered. Static. Then the tape resumed. Not from the beginning. From somewhere else. The timestamp was gone. Leonid was no longer running. The camera was stationary now, angled downward slightly as if set on the floor. And Leonid was standing directly in front of it. Too close.
His face filled the frame. Mila recoiled instinctively. His eyes were wide open.
Unblinking. The pupils dilated so far they swallowed most of the iris. His skin looked wrong, too pale, stretched tight in places, loose in others, like it didn't quite fit his skull anymore. And he was smiling. Not a human smile. Not emotion. Just the mechanical shape of one. For several seconds he said nothing. Just breathed. Slow.
Wet.
Then recording continues, he said. But the voice didn't match his lips. His mouth moved too late. The sound came first, then the motion followed half a second behind, like a puppet sinking badly to its own voice. Mila's skin prickled. Leonid tilted his head slightly, studying her.
No.
Not the camera. Her. The realization hit like ice water. He wasn't addressing whoever would find the tape. He was addressing the person watching it now. Mila's fingers tightened around the edge of the desk. That's not possible, she whispered. Leonid's smile widened. It is now. The lights in the lab flickered.
One.
Twice. Mila glanced up instinctively, and when she looked back, Leonid was closer. There had been no movement between frames. No transition. Just closer. His face now filled the entire screen. The details were unbearable. The faint twitch under his left eye. The way his lips stretched just a fraction too far at the corners. And his pupils, they weren't reflecting the camera light. They were reflecting something else. A room. This room. Mila's breath caught. In the black mirror of his eyes, she saw the lab behind her. The door. And something standing there, right behind her. She didn't turn. She couldn't. Her entire body locked as a cold awareness spread slowly up her spine. Leonid's voice dropped to a whisper. It followed the signal. A faint sound behind her. A footstep. Soft. Deliberate. The same dragging quality she'd heard beyond the door. Her throat tightened. Leonid's reflection blinked. But his real eyes didn't. It learned the shape of you, he continued. Another step. Closer now. Mila felt it. Not touch, but presence. Like standing too close to a deep hole and feeling the pull. Her voice came out barely audible. What do you want? Leonid's smile broke. Not faded, broke. Like a crack forming through glass. It already told you. The lab lights went out. Complete darkness swallowed the room. For a single suspended second, there was nothing. Then right behind her ear, something breathed in and whispered perfectly intimately, "Don't bring it home." Mila screamed and lurched forward, slamming into the desk, knocking the chair aside. Her hands fumbled blindly until she hit the emergency light switch on the wall. Red backup lighting flooded the lab. Pulsing. Wrong. She spun around. Nothing. No one. The shelves stood where they had always been. The door remained shut. Untouched. Mila staggered back, shaking, her chest heaving.
No, she said again, louder now. No, no, no.
The monitor crackled. She turned. Leonid was gone. The frame showed only the corridor again. Empty. But on the wall, the chalk spirals had changed. They weren't random anymore. They formed letters. Russian. Clear. Deliberate. Mila stepped closer, dread tightening like a vice around her ribs. She translated automatically, her mind moving faster than her fear. "You are next." The screen flickered once, and beneath it a second line appeared. Not in Russian, in English. "We are already here." The red lights dimmed further, and from somewhere deep inside the building, far below the basement, Mila heard it. A distant metal door slamming open. The sound that came from below was not an echo. Mila knew the difference instantly. An echo belonged to the space that produced it. It returned diminished, obedient to distance and walls. This sound rose through the floor with the weight of something newly unsealed. A blast door, maybe, or something older. Something thick enough that when it opened, the building itself had to accept the decision. The red emergency lights kept pulsing. Every third pulse seemed dimmer than the last. Mila stood in the center of the lab, trying to breathe normally, trying to force thought into a straight line. Her mouth tasted metallic. Her hands were numb. The monitor still showed the corridor from the tape empty except for the writing on the wall, but she could no longer tell whether the threat lived inside the footage, inside the building, or inside the part of her mind that had already let it in. Her phone. The thought came like a command. She snatched it from the desk, nearly dropping it in her hurry, and opened the screen with shaking fingers. No signal bars. No service. That was wrong. The basement usually had weak reception at best, but never none. She tried the internal messaging app. It froze on launch. She backed out, tried the security extension tied to the building's network. Loading circle. No connection. Then the screen flashed white. A recording window opened by itself. No app label. No icon. Just a timer at 000000000008 show. Mila stared at it. The timer began to count upward. She killed the app. The phone vibrated violently in her hand, once like a convulsion. Then the screen went black. When it came back, the lock screen displayed a notification from no sender. Lower service level access granted. Below it was a floor map of the archive building. Except the building ended at basement. 2. This map showed basement. 3. There was no basement. 3. Mila had worked in the archive for 6 years. She knew every storage level, every sealed records room, every maintenance corridor where the air smelled of old paper and antifungal chemicals. There was no third basement. On the map, a single red line traced a path from where she stood to a point below the foundation. At the end point was one label. Leonid, her thumb hovered over the screen until she realized she was crying, not sobbing. Just tears spilling soundlessly down her face while her body remained rigid with concentration. She wiped them away angrily. This was what terror did when it got past screaming. It made everything intimate. It stripped grandeur from fear and turned it into small humiliations. Shaking fingers, wet cheeks, the stupid childish wish for another person in the room. Then she remembered the voice using her mother's tone. The tears stopped at once. A memory surfaced clear as a blade.
She was 13.
Her father sitting at the kitchen table in darkness, unable to sleep. Not drunk, not ill, just staring into a switched-off television as though it were a window he feared might become transparent. She had asked him once, only once, whether Chernobyl had frightened him. He had answered without looking at her.
Radiation.
Then after a long time, but not as much as the people who heard voices underground. At the time she thought he was delirious with exhaustion. Years later, after his death, she found an old notebook among his things filled with technical shorthand and supply manifests from trips into the zone. Most of it meant nothing to her. One page near the back contained only a list of names and a sentence written 3 times in increasingly violent pen strokes. Do not respond if it knows your voice. She had never forgotten that line. Now, standing in the red pulse of emergency lighting with an impossible floor, plan in her hand, she wished she had asked more questions while he was still alive. Something clicked in the ceiling above her. Then another click. A row of fluorescent fixtures awakened one by one with a sickly stammer, returning partial light to the lab. The red emergency glow remained underneath, turning everything bruised and feverish. The restored monitor was still running, but the footage had changed again. Now it showed a room she had never seen before. A concrete chamber with a low ceiling and a circular depression in the center, like a drained well or a shaft mouth capped long ago. Thick cables ran down the walls into the floor. On the far side stood Leonid, half turned away, the camera apparently placed on a surface at chest height. He was speaking to someone outside the frame.
"No, that isn't possible," he said.
Pause. Then, in a voice so strained it sounded close to breaking, "You told us this level was sealed in 1986. Another pause. Mila leaned closer, listening to the reply. At first she thought there was no response. Then she realized the answer was there, just too low for words. A murmur like many mouths speaking beneath soil.
Leonid said, "That's not a person."
The murmur continued. Then Leonid whispered, "Why does it know my wife's name?" The image bent inward, the edges warping as though the lens were being heated from the other side. For a heartbeat, the circular depression in the floor appeared impossibly deep, descending not into concrete but into a darkness textured like moving water. Then the frame snapped back. A hand reached into view from somewhere off-screen left. Not grabbing, not urgent, just placing something carefully on the floor beside the depression. It was a reel-to-reel recorder. Old, portable, industrial gray. Mila knew that machine. Every archive worker in the country knew that machine. The model had been used for field logging by Soviet civil defense teams, utilities crews, and engineering inspectors through the late 70s and 80s. Bulky, reliable, ugly. She also knew exactly why her chest tightened when she saw the dent in the casing. Because the same dent existed on a recorder still sitting in a cupboard in her apartment, wrapped in one of her father's old shirts. His field machine. She took one step back from the screen.
"No."
Her own voice sounded thin and unreal.
"No."
On the footage, Leonid slowly turned toward the recorder. The camera did not show his face now, only his shoulders tensing beneath his work jacket. A voice spoke from off-screen. Not distorted, not layered, clear.
"Mali."
Older. It said one sentence. "Mila, if you are hearing this, do not come down here." Her legs nearly folded beneath her. It was her father. Not similar, not close, not suggestive, his voice. That dry, roughened cadence. The slight flattening of certain vowels from years of technical speech and nicotine. The exhausted patience that used to wrap even his kindest words in warning. Mila crossed the room so fast she hit the desk with her hip hard enough to bruise. She rewound the last 10 seconds, hands flying over controls she knew by muscle memory. The tape wound back. She played it again. The chamber. Leonid. The place recorder. And again that voice. "Mila, if you are hearing this, do not come down here." She stopped breathing. Her father had died in 2002. The tape was dated 1997. That should have made the sentence impossible, but not for the reason most people would think. Her father was alive in 1997. He could, theoretically, have been anywhere. The impossibility was sharper than that. He never called her Mila. Only one person in the family used the full name. To everyone else, especially to him, she had always been Milya. A soft habit from childhood that persisted into adulthood. Private. Inflexible. So fixed that hearing the formal version in his voice was like seeing a corpse blink. The thing on the tape had almost gotten him right. Almost. That imperfection steadied her. Only a little, but enough. She replayed it a third time. This time she listened not to the voice but to the room behind it. There under the words. A hum. Rhythmic. Mechanical. Not ambient building noise. Something larger. She froze the frame and boosted the audio using the desktop software, stripping hiss and pulling low frequencies forward. The lab speakers gave a groan of feedback, then resolved into clearer layers. First, Leonid breathing. Second, the whisper murmur. Third, the hum. And hidden beneath all three, a repeated tone, faint and regular, like a distant station chime. She knew that sound too. An elevator alarm. Her head turned very slowly toward the far wall of the lab. Behind a shelving row used for obsolete film canisters was a locked service corridor leading to the freight lift. The lift hadn't functioned in years. Anton joked that it was held together by dust and paperwork. It only ran during inspections, and even then maintenance had to coax it to life from the machine room. Now, through the shelves, Mila saw a pale strip of light. Not the warm yellow of the lab, a colder light. Industrial. And with it, faintly, came the chime again. She moved sideways until she could see into the gap between shelves. The service corridor door was open. She was utterly certain it had been closed earlier. Beyond it, the corridor glowed with white fluorescent spill. At the far end, the freight elevator doors stood parted by less than a hand's width. Light leaked through the seam. Another chime. Mila's phone buzzed in her hand. A new notification.
CAR arrived, she almost laughed.
A small, sharp sound escaped instead halfway to hysteria. The building was trying to talk to her like an app because somewhere inside all this horror was a thing that learned from signals, interfaces, recordings. It mimicked the forms people obeyed. Notifications. Voices. Instructions. Familiarity as bait. Her breathing slowed. She didn't want to go near that corridor. Every instinct in her body screamed against it. But another instinct told her, colder, inherited perhaps from her father's fatal loyalty to unfinished truths, was already assembling the pieces. The tape wasn't only a recording. It was a route. The thing inside it or behind it had found her because she watched. Because signal made a bridge. Because attention was invitation. And now it was trying to lead her below. That meant one of two things. Either going down was exactly what it wanted, or something down there wanted to warn her before it was too late. Mila grabbed the nearest heavy object from the desk, a brass tape splice block, rectangular and dense enough to break bone if she swung hard. Then she crossed to the wall locker where emergency supplies were kept. Flashlight, yes. Spare batteries. Dust mask. Small first aid kit. She snatched them all. When she opened the bottom drawer, her breath caught. Inside, beneath old incident forms and a cracked hard hat, lay a dosimeter. Not unusual in itself. Government archive. Legacy emergency equipment. But this one was switched on. The needle quivered high in the scale, then dropped, then leapt again so violently it struck the red zone. Radiation surge. Impossible. There was no source here. Not in any amount that could spike like that. Unless the instrument wasn't detecting radiation. Unless it was trying clumsily to measure proximity to something it had no category for. The phone vibrated again. Do not take the elevator, this message appeared beneath the first. A second later, the text changed. TOO late, every light in the lab went out except the cold fluorescent spill from the service corridor. And from beyond the shelves came a sound that made Mila's blood turn to ice. The elevator doors opening all the way, very slowly. With no one pressing the button. She turned the flashlight on and aimed it through the gap. The corridor beyond lay empty. The elevator stood open. Its interior was deeper than it should have been. Freight lifts in old buildings were shallow steel boxes lined with scratched panels and cheap rubber flooring. This looked like the mouth of a hallway. Fluorescent ceiling strips receded farther back than the shaft allowed. The rear wall was simply a draft rolled out of it. Not stale underground air. Not machine oil, wet concrete, rust.
Ozone.
And underneath both that same scent her father used to carry home on his clothes after zone work. Metal and rainwater. Mila whispered no. The speakers in the lab crackled. Then her father's voice said from everywhere at once, "Good. Don't." The elevator light flickered. At the back of the impossible space, far deeper than the shaft should have extended, a figure stepped partly into view. A man in a field jacket, head lowered. One hand lifted as if shielding his face from the fluorescent glare. "Milya," he called softly. This time the nickname was correct. Perfect. And that was how she knew it was not him. Because her father had lost the tip of his ring finger on his right hand in an equipment accident when she was 6. The hand raised in the elevator had all 5 fingers. Mila backed away. The figure took one step forward. Its face remained hidden by shadow, but the voice was gentle, urgent, loving enough to break something inside her. "Milya, please." It found the other way out. Behind her, from the sealed fire door at the stairwell, came a heavy metallic bang. Then another. Whatever had been outside earlier had not left. The elevator figure lifted its head a little higher. Still no face. Just shadow where a face should be. "You can still stop it," it said. Bang. The fire door shuddered in its frame. Bang. The monitor on the desk erupted into static. Through the noise, Leonid screamed a full-bodied, hopeless scream cut abruptly short. Bang. A crack split the reinforced glass panel in the fire door. Mila stood trapped between 2 entrances. One impossible way down. One thing trying to come in. Then the overhead speakers burst alive with a new sound. Anton's voice shrieking from every corner of the dark lab. "Don't let IT use the dead." The sentence snapped off in a burst of distortion. And from the open elevator hundreds of feet below where the shaft should have ended, something in the dark began climbing upward. The first sound it made was not a footstep. It was many small sounds arriving together and pretending to be one. A wet scrape, a fingernail ticking metal, breath dragged through a ruined throat, fabric whispering against concrete, teeth clicking lightly as if from cold. All of it rising through the elevator shaft in a rhythm that almost matched climbing, but not quite. Whatever was coming up did not understand how a body should move. It had studied motion the way it studied language, by imitation, not instinct. Mila stood frozen in the middle of the lab, flashlight trembling in one hand, the brass splice block slick in the other. To her left, the fire door buckled inward under another impact. The little square of wired safety glass burst and sprayed glittering fragments across the floor. To her right, the elevator waited with its impossible depth, its humming fluorescent lights, and the shadow shape in her father's jacket standing just far enough back to seem wounded, familiar, reachable. And beneath both sounds, beneath the pounding and the climbing, the tape on the monitor hissed and rolled through static like a mouth trying to form words through blood. This was the choice it wanted. Not left or right. Not escape or descent. Acceptance. Choose one lie. Open one door. Let one voice inside. Her father's notebook returned to her with startling force, not the line she had remembered first, but a second one she'd have forgotten because it made no sense at the time. Scribbled in the margin beside a list of inventory tags and route numbers. It cannot begin as itself. Someone has to answer. Mila swallowed against a dry throat and did the only thing she could think of. She closed her eyes. At once the room changed. Not physically, not in the obvious way, but with sight removed, the seduction weakened. The elevator became only fluorescent hum and damp air. The figure in it became only a voice in the shape of a man. The fire door became stress and metal. The monitor became static and spinning tape. The building no longer looked haunted. It sounded trapped. Bang. The fire door shook again. "Millia," the thing in the elevator said, softer now. "Open your eyes." She didn't. Another scrape from below. Closer. The voice shifted. Now it was her mother. Exhausted, tender, one hand probably pressed to her ribs the way she used to stand after long shifts. "Please, sweetheart, don't make me watch this happen to you." The precision of it nearly broke her. Mila bit the inside of her cheek until she tasted blood. Pain small and immediate. Something indisputably real.
No, she was.
The mother voice paused. Then, from the fire door, Anton cried ut a raw, strangled sound of sudden agony.
"Mila!
Open it, for God's sake!" The impact that followed was different. Not something battering the door. Something heavy slumping against it from the other side. Then a weak scraping like fingers dragging down metal. "You locked me out," Anton gasped. "It's here." Mila opened her eyes despite herself. The door was smeared beneath the broken glass square. Not blood. At least not only blood. Something dark and oily had been pressed through the mesh cracks, thin as seepage, slowly tracing itself down the paint in branching veins. It reflected the lab lights with a shine too wet, too deliberate. Her flashlight beam shook across the floor toward the service corridor. The elevator figure had not moved. Still patient. Still partly hidden. But below it, deep in the impossible shaft, movement gathered. Not one thing climbing now. Several. Pale hands appeared and vanished against the far wall, then faces or suggestions of faces, pushing briefly into fluorescent light before slipping back down. It was like watching a crowd attempt to become a person and failing repeatedly. Then the figure in the jacket spoke again, and this time it used her father's exact tone from one particular memory, the one from the hospital cafeteria, when he handed her a stale sandwich and told her not to wait up if he worked late. You always knew the difference when it mattered. Her chest tightened painfully. That was not a public memory. Not a generic cadence. It had found something deeper than sound. Something stored in grief itself. The thing behind the fire door moaned in Anton's voice. "It's inside me." Mila forced herself to think, not react.
Think.
What had Leonid said on the tape? It knows when it is being watched. And later on the speakers, don't let it use the dead, not the living. Not the dead themselves. The use of them. Their voices, their forms, their half-correct tenderness. The recorder. The old field recorder shown beside the shaft on the tape. Her father's recorder twin. Maybe not a prop. Maybe a tool. Maybe he and Leonid had tried to document it for the same reason people map radiation or measure contamination. Because some horrors obey rules once named. Mila snatched the dead phone from her pocket, hurled it across the room, and smashed it under her heel until the screen burst. The lab speakers hissed angrily. The monitor image wavered. Signal. It followed signal. Recording, playback, speakers, screens, devices, attention. She lunged for the workstation, yanked cables hard enough to skin her knuckles, and ripped the audio interface free. The speaker noise died instantly. She grabbed the monitor power cord next. Sparks bit her fingers as the plug came loose. The screen collapsed to black. At once the lab felt larger, not safer, larger, as though a mouth had stopped speaking in it. The elevator lights dimmed. The figure in the jacket took a single step forward for the first time. Mila, it said, and the love was gone from the voice now. Only urgency remained. If you cut the signal, it comes in fully. That was a threat disguised as advice. Good. Threats were easier than tenderness. Bang. The fire door hinge tore with a scream of metal. The upper corner buckled inward several centimeters. Mila swung the flashlight beam toward the emergency locker again, mind racing through forgotten procedures, obsolete equipment, anything analog enough to matter. Tape. Manual devices. Machines not networked, not intelligent, not porous to mimicry. Then she saw it on the lowest shelf under the first aid kit. A sealed hard case stamped with a faded ministry code. She dropped to her knees, popped the latches, and stared. Inside lay old civil defense equipment carefully nested in foam. A hand-crank field lamp, a compact Geiger unit, paper masks, and beneath them, wrapped in oilcloth, a reel-to-reel recorder. Her father's name was etched on the underside in tiny Cyrillic initials. For a moment, Mila couldn't move. He had left it here, not at home. Not forgotten in a cupboard. Here, in the building, hidden within reach of the lower archives. Which meant he had been here, in this basement. Maybe not in 1997. Maybe years later. Maybe following some trail from the zone that ended under Kyiv instead of Chernobyl. Maybe trying to bury it where nobody would listen. Or where only one person eventually would. The fire door burst inward another inch. Something slid through the cracked glass opening above the handle. Not a hand. A strip. Blackened, wet-looking, narrow as tape pulled from a reel. It wriggled slowly through the gap and hung there, dripping darkness onto the floor. Mila recoiled. The strip twisted in the air, and with nauseating recognition she realized it resembled magnetic tape, burnt tape. Charred ribbon wound with threads of hair or something like hair. More of it began feeding through the broken pane, one strip after another, searching blindly. The recorder case felt heavy in her hands. Mechanical. The reel's empty. There was a folded paper tucked into the lid. She snatched it out. Her father's handwriting. No question now. Hard downward strokes, compressed letters, the impatience of a man who expected interruption before finishing. The note was short. If it reaches the archive, do not play anything electronic. Use this. Light only. Voice only. It copies through transmission but not through original capture. Make it answer as itself. When it is heard without a borrowed shape, the door opens both ways. Burn the witness point. Do not go alone. Below that, a second line added later, darker ink dug almost through the paper. If I am already gone, forgive me for leaving this for you. Mila read it twice in one breath. Another hit rattled the fire door so hard the frame split from the masonry with a crack like gunfire. No time. She jammed blank tape onto the recorder spindles with clumsy fingers, threaded it across the heads, and snapped the tension arm down. Purely mechanical. No digital readout, no speaker, no wireless anything. She cranked the lamp and flooded the desk with a hard white beam. Make it answer as itself. How? The elevator figure was smiling now. not gently.
Patiently.
It knew she had understood enough to be dangerous and not enough to survive. The strips of black tape sliding through the fire door thickened, gathering on the floor in slow coils like eels dragged from water. They twitched toward her shoes, then halted at the edge of the lamp's light. Light only. Voice only. Mila set the recorder's microphone upright and pressed record. The reels began to turn with a soft, steady whisper. Her own voice sounded strange to her at first, too calm, almost formal. My name is Mila Sidorova. This is an original recording. If anything is here using borrowed voices, answer without imitation. Nothing. The coils on the floor quivered. From the elevator, the father-shape laughed softly, badly. The laugh had too many notes in it. Too many ages. Mila kept going. This is not playback. This is not transmission. This is witness. Identify yourself. The fire door bulged inward. Another strip forced through the crack, then another, knotting together now into a thicker black braid. A smell filled the room, hot dust, scorched plastic, cellar damp, and underneath it that same metallic rain sent from childhood, only rotten now, spoiled by time. Identify yourself, she repeated. A long silence followed. Then the recorder meter jumped. Not from her voice. From something lower than hearing. The microphone trembled in its stand. The reels slowed as if thick fluid had entered the mechanism. From every dark corner of the room came a murmur. Not through speakers. In the air. The elevator figure froze. The tape strips on the floor recoiled slightly. Good. Mila leaned closer to the microphone, her fear sharpening into anger. How many voices are you wearing? The answer came from nowhere and everywhere at once. Not loud. Not layered. A single voice stripped raw of human resemblance. It sounded like wet stone grinding against itself underwater. It said, enough. Every light in the lab exploded. Glass rained down. The flashlight died in Mila's hand. The hand crank lamp guttered but held. The elevator went dark from the inside out, its false fluorescent depth collapsing into a black shaft again. The figure in her father's jacket vanished as if erased. Behind the fire door, something screamed. Not Anton, not human. An enormous metallic shriek, furious and wounded. The black tape coils on the floor convulsed away from the recorder, writhing back toward the broken door pane. Mila's pulse hammered so hard she thought she might faint. But she had asked. It had answered. And for one brief second, the room lost its masks. In the hand crank lamp's stark beam, she saw what had been pressing through her building, her tape, her grief. Not a ghost, not a person, not even a creature in any stable sense. A density. A vertical seam of darkness folding in on itself, full of embedded fragment eyes that opened in the wrong places. Bits of mouths speaking silently inside other mouths, hands caught halfway through walls. Lengths of tape ribbon and wires and hair bound together around something deeper that no light could settle on. It rose from the broken fire door to the ceiling and down through the floor, as though the building had intersected only one slice of a much larger body. And at its center, pressed like insects in amber, were faces. Dozens. Then hundreds. Some dead with age, some burned, some smooth and pale. Some little more than impressions, but all of them straining outward from the black mass with expressions of unbearable awareness.
Leonid.
A woman in a helmet. Anton. And for one heart-stopping instant, her father. Not mimicking now. Trapped. His mouth moved soundlessly against the black membrane surrounding him. One hand lifted. 3 fingers. Then pointed downward. Not toward the elevator. Toward the floor beneath the workstation. The witness point. Mila dropped to her knees and swept the lamp beam across the concrete. At first she saw nothing except dust, cable runs, shattered glass. Then the light struck a thin brass circle set flush into the floor, almost invisible beneath years of grime and desk legs. A hatch handle. Old. Buried under neglect. The black seam shuddered violently as if realizing she had seen it. The fire door tore free from one hinge. The recorder meter slammed into red. The reel spun faster without any mechanical reason. Mila hooked her fingers under the brass ring and pulled. It didn't move. She pulled harder. Behind her, the thing made a sound like hundreds of inhalations merging into one. The hatch gave with a screech of rust. Beneath it, a narrow shaft ladder descending into darkness, and from below, the unmistakable smell of wet concrete and reactor dust. A real way down, not the elevator, not the imitation, the original route. Her father's face in the seam convulsed once more. His lips formed two words she couldn't hear but understood anyway. Burn it. The recorder suddenly began playing back, though she had not switched modes. The raw voice she'd captured spilled into the room again. The black seam lunged toward her. Mila grabbed the lamp, the recorder, and the can of cleaning alcohol from the desk in one frantic sweep, then dropped feet first into the shaft as the thing struck the place where she had been standing, and the entire lab above erupted into screaming metal. She hit the ladder hard, almost lost her grip, and slid 3 rungs before stopping. Above her, the hatch slammed shut on its own. Darkness swallowed her. Then, just inches below her face, a man's voice rose from the shaft depths. Very quiet, very close. "Don't turn around," Anton whispered. "It followed you down." Mila hung on the ladder in absolute darkness, every muscle locked so hard with terror that pain vanished beneath it. Below her, Anton had spoken. Above her, the hatch had sealed. And somewhere in the shaft with her, something had come down that had no right to exist anywhere human beings had ever laid concrete. She did not turn around. At first, she thought she had gone deaf. The darkness was so complete it seemed to absorb sound as thoroughly as it consumed light. Then sensation returned in fragments. The thin sting in her palms where rust bit into skin, the ache in her ribs from the drop, the sharp smell of old mineral water and corroded metal, and underneath all of it, faint but steady, the click-click-click of the recorder reel still turning in her left hand. The hand crank lamp had gone out when she fell. She could feel its dented casing hanging from 2 fingers of her other hand. "Anton," she whispered. A long pause. Then, from somewhere below and slightly to her left, "Yes, wrong." Not because of the word, because of the delay. Too clean, too measured. Like something had searched for the safest possible answer and chosen it. Her mouth tightened. "What did you say over the speakers?" she asked, still not turning. Another pause. Then Anton's voice, almost right, "Don't let it use the dead." Mila's throat moved. That was what she had heard, but not what he had started to say. She knew it with sudden certainty. The sentence had cut off too fast, and memory now uncoiled the missing pieces. Not the dead. "Don't let it use you." The recorder in her hand ticked on. Mechanical.
Honest.
A witness still running. Her father's note pulsed in her mind. Make it answer as itself. Burn the witness point. This shaft was real. The hatch was real. The route downward, hidden beneath the workstation, was the original path, which meant whatever lay below had been contained once, not perfectly, not forever, but physically enough that someone had built over it, hidden it, fed it through sealed corridors and abandoned levels in the ruined throat of another disaster. Chernobyl had not created it. Chernobyl had wounded the world deeply enough for it to be noticed. And people, being people, had recorded it, measured it, moved it, carried pieces of its doorway from place to place in boxes, tapes, cabinets, archives. Every transmission widened the crack. Mila drew one slow breath and another. Then, deliberately, she cranked the lamp. The dynamo whined softly. A hard white circle burst into life. The shaft walls leapt out around herpoured concrete, slimed with moisture, crossed by rusted ladder brackets. The drop below extended maybe another 2 stories before opening into a chamber lit by a weak amber emergency bulb. No Anton stood there. Only a landing platform and a corridor beyond. Above her, just a meter higher, the darkness on the rungs thickened. Not falling, not climbing, clinging. It had spread itself flat against the shaft wall and ladder rails like oil skinned across water, and only the lamp's beam gave it edges. Faces pressed within it and slipped away before recognition could settle. Fingers emerged, elongated, then dissolved back into the black mass. A child's voice laughed once from somewhere inside it. Leonid gasped. Her mother sighed. Her father said her name almost correctly.
Milia.
The lamp shook in her hand. The black seam rippled downward 1 rung. It stopped at the edge of the light. Good. A rule, not safety. A rule. Mila descended carefully, keeping the lamp raised above her shoulder so the beam cut upward into the thing's path. It followed her, sliding when she moved, stopping when the light steadied. Each rung rang lightly beneath her boots. The recorder clicked in her grip. The smell grew stronger the lower she went. Wet dust, hot metal, old ozone, and something sweet underneath that she realized with horror was rot-sealed for years and recently disturbed. She reached the landing and backed away from the ladder without taking her eyes off the shaft. The black mass hovered 2 meters above the platform, folded around the rails. It seemed larger now that more of it had entered the light, though size meant little with it. Parts of it bulged from impossible depths. Parts narrowed to threads thinner than wire. Human features pushed outward in brief blooms, an eye here, a jaw there, a hand flattened against the surface from within as if trapped behind black ice. Then one face remained, her father, not an imitation this time. Or if it was, it had gone far deeper than mimicry. He looked older than when she had last seen him alive, skin translucent with strain, one cheek torn by a black fissure running into the mass around him. But the eyes, those were his eyes. Not perfect, not dead, not peaceful, just terribly aware. His mouth worked once before sound came. "Lamp up," he whispered. The voice did not come through the air like the others. It vibrated from the recorder in her hand. Mila stared at it. The reels were still turning. On the tape being made now, his voice had found a path. "Papa?" she said before she could stop herself. Pain crossed his face, not from the word, but from what it cost him to answer. Not much time. The black seemed convulsed around him. Several other faces pushed forward, screaming silently. The father face shuddered, nearly vanished, then returned. Mila swallowed down the surge in her throat. "Are you real?" The faintest, bleakest hint of a smile touched his mouth. "Enough to tell you the truth." She almost broke then. Not because she believed him completely, because she wanted to.
What is it?
His gaze flicked toward the corridor beyond the landing. A wound that learned repetition. A place where too many last voices remained unwitnessed. Reactor, tunnel, shelter, archive, it doesn't matter. People recorded terror. Terror remembers. Every copy gave it another surface. The mass jerked downward suddenly, testing the lamp's boundary. Mila thrust the beam higher. It recoiled with a hiss like rain hitting hot metal.
"What is the witness point?" she asked.
His face tightened. "Where original sound entered structure. First capture." First answer down there. He moved one eye, just enough to indicate the corridor beyond. Mila looked. The passage was narrow and old, older than the building above. Cables ran along one wall and disappeared into a chamber ahead. A low amber light pulsed there, steady as a failing heart. "How do I burn it?" "Alcohol won't be enough." His voice rasped, thinning already. "There's a purge line in the chamber. Emergency fuel for document incineration, old archive disposal system. Manual valve. Open it. Light it at the well." The black mass swelled again around his face, and this time other mouths spoke over his words in a rush of borrowed tenderness. "Don't leave me. I'm cold. Sweetheart. Mila, please." He bared his teeth, not in rage, but effortan for one impossible moment forced them back. "Do not answer anyone who loves you." The sentence hit with the force of a physical blow. Mila nodded once. His eyes closed briefly, opened again. "Wet."
"Human."
"I tried to bury it here," he said. "After the zone, they moved material underground. Tapes, logs, reactor audio, worker calls. Things recovered from walls, from lockers, from bodies. They wanted patterns. I heard it before they did. I helped seal this place." He inhaled sharply as the black around him tightened. "I thought it stayed at Chernobyl. I was wrong. It followed the people who listened long enough." Mila couldn't speak. "I kept the recorder because original capture heard it," he said. "Not playback. Not copies. First witness. It cannot fully wear what is being made for the first time. That's why it wants old grief. Old voices fit easily." A sound rose from deeper in the corridor. Not the scene behind her. Something ahead. A low, resonant hum. The chamber. Her father's face went tense with urgency. "Go now. Keep the lamp on it." And Mila. He stopped. The black membrane slid over half his mouth. When he spoke again, the words came broken. "I am not all the way here." The honesty of it was crueler than any comfort. "But some of me is," he said. "Enough to be sorry." The mass surged. His face vanished. In its place, her mother appeared, smiling through tears. Mila turned away before the thing could speak. She ran. The corridor floor sloped gently down, slick with mineral residue and old dust disturbed by nothing living in years. The amber pulse ahead brightened. Pipes lined the ceiling. On the walls, beneath newer archive markings, older symbols emerged in faded red paint, circles crossed by vertical strokes, the same sign from Leonid's tape. Warning containment Parish, she could no longer tell. Behind her, the black seam flowed off the shaft and into the corridor ceiling like liquid shadow pursuing along cracks and joins. The lamp kept it at a distance, but barely. Whenever she stumbled and the beam dipped, hands reached from the dark overhead, clutching at air. The chamber opened without warning. She almost stopped dead. It was the room from the tape. Concrete circular chamber, low ceiling. Cable runs down the walls. And in the center, the depression in the floor of the well, the witness point 3 meters wide, ringed in steel, descending into a darkness that did not reflect the amber lamp mounted above it. Beside the well stood a waist-high control pedestal crusted with rust. A manual valve wheel protruded from one side.
Fuel purge. Her father had told the truth.
But the chamber had changed since Leonid's recording. The walls were covered now, not with chalk spirals, with handprints. Hundreds of them layered until the concrete seemed furred with soot-dark palms. Some prints were normal. Others had too many fingers. Some were tiny, child-sized. A portable reel-to-reel recorder sat near the well. Not her father's. Another one. Burned, dented, half-melted. And beside it lay bones in a collapsed protective suit. Leonid, or what remained after decades underground. Mila's breath hitched once, then flattened into pure concentration. She set her recorder on the pedestal, lamp aimed backward toward the corridor entrance where darkness already pooled like stormwater. The black seam could not enter fully while the light held, but it was gathering. Faces formed and vanished in the threshold. Anton stared out with a ruined expression. A little girl smiled. Her mother reached. Her father did not appear again. Mila grabbed the valve wheel and hauled. It screamed in protest but moved a fraction. From vents around the steel ring of the well came a cough of stale air. Again. She braced both feet and turned harder. Rust crumbled. Muscles burned from shoulder to spine. The wheel lurched half a rotation, then another. A wet fuel smell burst into the chamber, old accelerant, chemical and sharp. Good. The seam at the door writhed violently. Voices spilled from it, no longer bothering with one at a time. Mila, please, hurts. You left me, turn off the lamp, come closer. The recorder meter flicked though nobody touched it. Then, from the tape currently being made, a sound emerged. At first she thought it was feedback.
No.
It was weeping. Men, women, children, radio operators, workers. Some near, some far, all folded together beneath the present moment like trapped weather. Not one event, many. Final calls layered by time and copied across places until the wound had depth. Chernobyl had not birthed it. Chernobyl had fed it magnificently. Mila fumbled in her pocket for a lighter she had taken absent-mindedly from the emergency drawer upstairs. It was cheap, plastic, almost empty. Her thumb slipped on the striker. No flame. The seam surged 1 meter into the room. The lamp dimmed. Mila struck again. Sparks. Nothing. She looked at the recorder. Original capture. Voice only. Make it answer as itself. She leaned toward the microphone, throat raw, and said the one thing she had not yet dared. All of you who are still inside it, answer me. The chamber went silent. Not quiet. A pressure built in the well, deep enough to vibrate through her boots. The seam froze mid-motion. Every face in it turned toward the recorder at once. Then the answer came. Not from the seam. From below, up out of the witness point. Hundreds of voices, stripped of mimicry, stripped of borrowed affection, stripped even of the thing wearing them. Not one intelligence, but a massive trapped human presence finally heard without disguise. They spoke over and through one another, but the meaning arrived whole. Now the lighter caught. Small blue flame, beautiful, impossible. Mila threw it into the well. For one heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the purge vents ignited. Fire did not rise, it detonated upward in a roaring column, white-orange and hungry, punching heat into the chamber ceiling. The well became a furnace mouth. Flames raced along the handprints on the walls as if invisible fuel connected them. The seam at the doorway convulsed in a sound beyond screaming, a multi-layered rupture of voices splitting apart from the thing that had worn them. The lamp burst. Darkness and fire strove together. Mila threw herself behind the pedestal as heat slammed across the room. Burning black ribbons lashed through the air, writhing like live tape in a magnetic storm. Faces peeled from the seam in flashes: Leonid, Anton, strangers in helmets, children, workers, women with ash-gray skin, men with bleeding ears. Mouths open in final messages that were no longer being stolen. And in the midst of them, just once her father, not trapped now, falling backward into light. He looked at her with something like peace and raised his right hand. 4 fingers. Then he was gone. The seam tore. That was the only word for it. The black vertical body split from top to bottom as if the fire had found a hidden zipper in reality. From inside came darkness of a different order, not presence, not hunger, just absence being forced closed. The chamber walls cracked. The handprints burned away. Overhead pipes burst in hammering jets of steam. The recorder on the pedestal screamed with overloaded tape hiss. Mila ran. She didn't remember deciding to. 1 second she was crouched behind the pedestal. The next she was in the corridor, stumbling uphill through smoke and darkness lit by bursts of orange from behind. The seam lashed after her once, a burnt rope of voices, then collapsed into sparks and cinders that died before touching the floor. The shaft ladder appeared through rolling smoke. The hatch above was open. Impossible, but open. Cold basement air poured down. Mila climbed with blistered hands and burning lungs while the chamber beneath her failed in waves of concussive sound. Once, halfway up, something brushed her ankle and she nearly fell, but it was only loose tape, charred and harmless, drifting down past her like black snow. She reached the top, hit the hatch with her shoulder and spilled onto the archive lab floor. The room was wrecked. The workstation lay overturned. Shelves had collapsed. The fire door hung twisted from one hinge. Soot smeared the ceiling in branching veins. But the impossible elevator light was gone. The service corridor stood dark and empty. No voice called her name. No movement waited in reflections. Only the ordinary crackle of a small fire dying somewhere in a burst conduit, and the far-off scream of the building alarm finally deciding to function. Mila rolled onto her back and coughed until bile burned her throat. Then she heard a weak sound to her left. A person. She turned. Anton lay slumped against the wall near the fire door, blood on his temple, one arm bent awkwardly beneath him. Alive. Terrified. When he saw her moving, he flinched first, then stared in disbelief.
Mila?
His own voice. Human, uncertain, ugly with pain. She laughed once and sobbed on the same breath. He blinked at the open hatch beside the desk, then at the smoke curling from it.
What the hell was down there?
Mila looked at the black square in the floor. Nothing answered. At sunrise, emergency crews found them on the archive steps wrapped in gray blankets. Both of them coughing soot into paper masks while officials shouted into radios and sealed off the lower levels. Mila said almost nothing.
Anton, concussed and shaking, said less.
By noon, men from Ministry she did not recognize had taken the destroyed workstation, every surviving tape from the room, and the section of floor around the hidden hatch. They asked careful questions in careless tones. Mila gave them names, dates, equipment details, and nothing they could use to bury the truth neatly. 3 days later, when she was finally allowed back into her apartment under supervision to collect essentials, she went straight to the bedroom cupboard where she had kept her father's old field recorder. It was gone. In its place sat a plain archival box with no return address. Inside was a single reel of fresh tape, no label, no note. Mila stared at it for a very long time before closing the box and carrying it not to a machine, not to a lab, not to any device with a screen or speaker, but to the bank of the Dnipro at dusk. She brought a hammer. She smashed the reel until the casing split. Inside, the tape ribbon had already been burned to ash. At the bottom of the box, hidden beneath the reels, lay one last scrap of paper in her father's handwriting. Only one sentence: some doors close only after they know they were seen. Mila never worked in audio restoration again. Years passed. The official records of the archive fire changed twice, then vanished into internal databases no one could access without 3 signatures and a lie. Anton moved away from Kyiv and never spoke to her again except for one New Year's message that simply read, "Still no voices." She kept no recordings in her home, no voicemail, no smart speakers, no video calls longer than necessary. If she heard her name spoken by a stranger in the wrong tone, she left. Sometimes, in crowded places, she caught the scent of metal and rainwater and had to grip the nearest table until it passed. Sometimes she dreamed of the chamber and woke with her hands clenched around imaginary ladder rungs. And once, only once, 10 years later, she was standing in a supermarket checkout line when the old overhead speaker system crackled with harmless static before a clerk's routine announcement. For half a second before the announcement began, a man's tired voice whispered very softly through the static, "Lamp up." No one else reacted. Mila left her basket where it stood and walked into the evening without looking back. Because she understood something then, that the fire had not changed. The thing under Chernobyl, under archives, under walls built over last words and sealed histories, might be wounded. It might be starving. It might even be in places closed. But the world is full of recordings. And somewhere, in some basement, in some evidence room, in some forgotten ministry vault, there is always another tape waiting for someone curious enough to press play.